Rupert's Tales, The Wheel of the Year, written by Kyrja, illustrated by Tonia, Bennington, Osborn. Rupert misses Mabon. Rupert the rabbit was in a great big hurry. If he wanted to make it in time, he'd really have to scurry. So down the path he ran, through the grass and through the trees, stretching out his long legs, running as fast as the breeze. He knew it was time for the people to come again, to gather here from all the many places they'd been. They came to celebrate in a very special place, in a meadow or clearing, a kind of round space. Here in the forest, out in the open air, they could dance, drum, and pray without a single care. Lifting their voices together in song, chant or praise, they called on God and Goddess, using the energy they raised. Rupert looked forward to the times when the people would come, especially when they played for hours on their many lively drums. As Rupert ran through the woods, he had these things on his mind, not paying attention to what was in front of him or what was behind. He only knew he had to hurry or he would soon be late. He'd miss the celebration and then he'd have a long time to wait. The people only came to celebrate together on certain special days. So he hurried even faster, eager to be on his way. That's when it happened, even though it shouldn't have, and if Rupert would have been more careful, it wouldn't have. Melvin the mouse was in the middle of the path, right in the way. When Rupert saw him, it was much too late to stop or sway. And so did Melvin go flying, without even using any wings, landing in a patch of yellow daisies, of all things. Rupert too had gone flying through the air, tumbling and rolling out of control, and feeling a little scared. "Are you hurt?" he heard Melvin ask from the bushes on his right. "You know you really gave me a terrible fright." "I'm sorry, my friend, really I am," Rupert replied, rubbing his head. "I should have been watching out for what was ahead." "Why are you in such a hurry?" Melvin asked, coming into view. He came out from behind the bush, trailing a daisy petal or two. "Today is a festival for the people who come to visit us here. If I don't really hurry, I'll miss the festivities, I fear." "Ah, yes," said Melvin, shaking his head sadly in dismay. "And just what do you think you're doing, carrying on that way? People are people, and not like you and me. Any one of them could hurt you, don't you see?" While Melvin was talking, he started walking around, picking up the things he'd dropped, scattered on the ground. Rupert was taken aback by Melvin's strange words. The thought that any of the people he'd seen would hurt him seemed absurd. He thought about telling Melvin of the things he'd seen and done, of all he'd learned about the seasons and of the moon and sun, of how he'd even met the Lord and the lady a time or two. But Rupert wasn't sure Melvin would believe any of it was true. Besides, he really didn't have any time to waste. If he was going to watch the people in their circle, he'd have to make haste. That's when he saw Melvin had a basket he'd never seen before. In it, Melvin had piled acorns, pine cones, sweetgrass and more. Rupert couldn't help himself, despite the fact he was running behind. He had to know what the mouse was doing with goodies of all kinds. But Melvin squeaked for help, just as Rupert opened his mouth to ask, trying to carry an apple, even though he was way too small for the task. It was a big red apple, much too large for Melvin to take in stride. And oh, it looked like it was delicious and all juicy inside. "Where are you going with all of that?" Rupert asked his small friend, taking the fruit from Melvin carefully by its long stem. "I thought you were in a hurry," Melvin said, lifting his chin. "If you won't listen to the whole story, then I'm not even going to begin." Rupert paused for a moment because he knew Melvin very well. This was one of those times his friend was being stubborn, he could tell. Sometimes the mouse got bossy and thought himself very wise, but then again, Rupert knew Melvin had travelled very far and very wide. The mouse liked to collect stories as he went in search of his treasures, gathering foods, odds and ends, legends, yarns and tales of every measure. If he stayed to listen, then he could help Melvin carry his things. He didn't want to do it, but being careless has a price that it brings. Rupert sighed to himself, knowing he was already too late, and he knew his help was something his friend would appreciate. "I'll be glad to stay to hear all you have to say," Rupert finally said, even though he felt sad for not going to the people's celebration instead. "Good," said Melvin, "because I really do need your help with my basket. It's too big for me to carry, but I was a little embarrassed to ask it." As he picked up an onion, Melvin began, "Today is the autumn equinox, you see, when the sun and the moon both share the skies equally." "Oh, I see," Rupert frowned. His voice sounded sad, and it seemed to quiver, remembering that before long it would be very cold. He even felt himself shiver. He'd forgotten a fairy had once warned him that the sun would start to fade, and he'd soon be looking for warm shelter instead of for cool shade. Melvin continued to explain, "And so it's time for our second harvest of the season. After all, Mabon follows Lammas, so the timing only stands to reason." "Mabon?" asked Rupert, confused as he'd ever been, but distracted by the knowledge that the summer would be coming to an end. "Well," Melvin smiled, giving a little shrug, "that's the name the people call it by. Those of us who are animals only know this is when the year starts to die." "The year starts to die?" Rupert asked, feeling alarmed. "But what does that mean?" Rupert didn't understand yet how the seasons passed. That much could easily be seen. The weather starts to cool, and many plants turn to brown from green. It's not the beginning of the year or its end, but somewhere in between. People use this day to welcome the beginning of the end of the year, and to praise the Lord and the Lady for all the blessings they hold dear. people do these things?" Rupert asked with a suspicious gleam in his eyes. "But I thought you said being near people wasn't very wise." "Oh, you caught me," the mouse said with a sly grin. "It's true, but if you hadn't run into me, I wouldn't have had any help from you. You weren't the only one who was late and running behind. I should have already had all of this sorted, with my shelves neatly lined. Instead of taking the day to relax and enjoy all the bounty you see here, I waited too long and ended up getting trampled on from the rear." Rupert laughed along with his small friend, still sorry he'd missed the people's ritual, but glad he was helping in the end. "But I was telling you a story, and I'm not quite done," Melvin told him, picking up acorns and putting them in the basket one by one. "As you may have guessed from what you've learned before, there's more than one way to celebrate, many more. Some call this Sabbath the Weavers' Festival, when they braid bright cords, casting spells to add strength and unity and setting protective wards. And many who grow crops all year long leave a corner of each field, a little bit of each thing grown, a little of what each crop yields. People do these things to give thanks for their blessings and foodstuffs, believing God and Goddess will always provide more than enough." Melvin saw Rupert twitch and understood what he was thinking, so he gave his long-legged friend a smile and he closed one eye, winking. "Yes, the end of the year means that it will soon be cold, and it's true that the sweet grass will all be withered and old. But Rupert," Melvin scolded, "with all we have here, we've got it made." The little mouse pointed at the overflowing basket where his own harvest laid. "And death, my friend, is truly nothing to fear, whether it be your own or the turning of the wheel of the year. Birth, death, and rebirth are all part of the same mystery of life. No matter the weather, from time to time, we all face sadness and strife. And that is the message of Mabon, my friend," said Melvin, making a little bow, "to celebrate what we have right here and right now." "And balance," said Rupert, "it seems to me is important, is it not? Work and play, life and death, night and day, and even cold and hot." "Now you've got it," Melvin said with a grin. "So let's get this all put away so our own celebration can begin." So off they went, the two furry friends, not missing Mabon after all, in the end.